St. Rita's parents, Antonio and Amata, were very holy people. They lived in the town of Rocco Parina, where they were a great influence to the people of the town to live good lives. They had enough money to not be poor, but not so much to be rich, and they enjoyed giving what they had to the poor and others who didn't have as much as them. Although Antonio and Amata were very happy with their lives, there was one thing they didn't have that they desired immensely: a child. Despite their many prayers over the years, it seemed that God was deaf to their prayers. However, so great was their confidence in God that they redoubled their prayers as they advanced in age. One night, as Amata was praying, an angel appeared to her to let her know that she and Antonio would be favored with a daughter. This daughter would be very special. She would be granted the seal of sanctity, possess every virtue possible, and that she would be a helper of the helpless, an advocate of the afflicted, and a guiding star in the firmament of the church. And so, to Antonio and Amata's great joy, Rita was born on May 22, 1381. While pondering over what name to give her, it was made known by God that he wished for the baby to be named Rita, a name that was not known by anyone at that time. After St. Rita's life and canonization, her name would be used for millions of baby girls. Rita's life would be filled with unusual and impossible things, and God didn't waste any time. The day after her baptism, a swarm of white bees settled around Rita's face as she slept outside, and those who witnessed it were too stunned to shoo the bees away. The bees went in and out of Rita's mouth as though gathering honey, never waking her. Although they didn't understand what the mystery meant, they knew the incident of the white bees meant something. These white bees were indeed a symbol of how God would use St. Rita. Even after her death, the white bees continued to appear. In fact, they appear from the walls of the monastery during Holy Week, and they would remain until the feast of St. Rita, May 22nd, when they became inactive until Holy Week of the following year. Pope Urban VII, hearing of the mysterious bees, asked that they be brought to Rome. After a careful examination, they attached a string of the Holy See to the bee and set it free. The string was later found in their nest in the monastery of Cascia, 85 miles away. The holes in the wall, where the bees traditionally remained until the following year, can be clearly seen by the pilgrims that come to the monastery today. As St. John Chrysostom puts it, the bee is more honored than any other animals, not because it labors, but because it labors for others. And Rita would be used to labor for others throughout her whole life. She lived a quiet childhood. She never played with dolls or toys or participated in games. She preferred quiet contemplation. But just like the bees, her sweetness drew the children to her, and she had a lot of friends. When she was about 12 years old, Rita told her parents that she wanted to become a nun. Her parents listened to her wishes, but their sad faces told Rita her desire to leave them made them unhappy. They answered her that indeed they had hoped that Rita would stay with them to see them through their old age, help them with housework, and possibly even marry to keep the family name. Rita answered, "Not my will but thine be done," and set aside her own desires to become a nun in order to stay and help her parents, but she did not intend to marry. Rita did not go sulking her way through life as she lived at home with her parents. If anything, she found great joy in sacrificing her own will for their happiness, and her cheerfulness and hard work helped her elderly parents greatly. Unfortunately, this happiness didn't last for long. As Rita grew old enough to be of marriageable age, her parents told her joyfully that they had found her a husband who would provide for both of them and also keep the family lineage from going extinct. This was a little harder for Rita to accept. In fact, she argued with them, although respectfully, telling them, "My parents, I do not wish any spouse but Jesus Christ. Years ago, I dedicated my whole body, heart, and soul to his love and holy service. Because you wished it, I gave my promise not to enter a convent. I feel sure, with the help of God, without embracing the marriage state, that I will still be able to console and comfort you, and provide for all your necessities until God calls you to a better and happier home." But her parents insisted this would be the best for all of them. And though at first Rita was very troubled and grieved, interiorly, she learned from God that this was His will, and it would please Him more to have her obey her parents than to have her make a vow of virginity. At peace at last, Rita humbly told her parents that she would do whatever they wanted. Antonio and Amata chose Paolo Mancini to be their daughter's spouse. He was the son of a well-to-do and influential parents, and outwardly, he was everything you would want in a son-in-law. But in reality, he was arrogant and rude. In the courtship leading to their marriage, he was the perfect gentleman, and even for a short while afterwards, he was good to Rita. But it didn't take long for his true colors to show. Prone to fits of anger at the smallest things, he took it all out on Rita, sometimes mocking her, and other times swearing at her and criticizing her. Although she had been doing housework since she was a child and was very good at it, nothing was good enough for Paolo. Rita bore it all with obedience and meekness, tolerating his anger sometimes with silence and other times answering him when commanded to. One would think her gentleness would have an influence on Paolo, but he only became more critical and difficult to live with. Most people would understandably either retaliate with anger or just give up on their marriage, but Rita dealt with his emotional tantrums with patience, waiting for his tirade to be over, and then with gentleness would reason with him at how his anger and fits were displeasing to God. Little by little, he was slowly won over, and eventually, after several years, Paolo converted. After years of discord, Rita and Paolo enjoyed a peaceful and loving marriage. And as though God was waiting for Paolo's full surrender, they were blessed with their son, Giovanni, and later, another boy, Paolo. The boys were brought up in a house of love with good examples from Paolo of what it meant to be a man, and from Rita of how to love God. For some years, the family lived in peace and harmony, and Rita was known among town to be as pious and holy as her parents, who had by now passed away years before. She baked bread for the poor and counseled unhappy wives in their marriages. It's even said that at times sick people were cured by her saying a simple Hail Mary by their bedside. Unfortunately, all of this came to a halt one day when a former enemy of Paolo's found revenge on him by cornering him and stabbing him with a knife, leaving him for dead on the streets. Rita was beside herself with grief. Her grief was, of course, for losing her husband, who she loved with all her heart, despite his selfishness in the past, but also for the fact that he had not been able to receive the sacraments before he died. Her two sons, who had been practically modeled children all their childhood, became morose and surly as they entered in their teen years. Rita noticed that, despite their protective upbringing, they had been influenced by the trend at that time to take vengeance on an enemy, and that this was seen as honorable and just. Overhearing a conversation between the two brothers about avenging the murder of their father, Rita implored them tearfully to not do it, reminding them how grave a sin it was. They ignored her, and Rita turned to God, begging God to either change their hearts or let them die before committing such a sin. And so, both of her sons died within a year. Saint Rita, who is now alone in the world, once again offered herself to God. After some time of much prayer, of discernment of where to go, she felt led to go to Cascia. At once she rose from prayer and walked to Cascia and knocked on the convent doors of St. Mary Magdalene, otherwise known as the Convent of the Magdalena. She was not received immediately. In fact, because she was no longer a virgin and this particular convent had never received anyone who was a widow, she was rejected 3 times. In fact, she was told it was impossible for them to receive her and that she shouldn't bother applying again. So she went back to Rocco Perina disappointed, but certain that if God wanted her there, he would find a way. Rita redoubled her prayers to Jesus to allow her to become his spouse, as well as praying to her 3 favorite saints, St. John the Baptist, St. Augustine, and St. Nicholas of Tolentine. In fact, it was from them that she learned that her prayers had been heard as they were shouting her name outside her house at night. Rita, Rita, fear not. God will admit you into the cloister as his spouse. Immediately she fell into an ecstasy, where she saw the same 3 saints and heard a voice say, "Come, Rita, my beloved. It is now time for you to enter the Maddalena convent, whose door was so often closed against you." After awakening from her ecstasy, She opened her door, and there St. John the Baptist stood, beckoning her to follow him. He led her to the summit of a reef, where St. Augustine and St. Nicholas of Tolentine were waiting. Summoning her to follow them, they led her along the paths and streets back to Cascia, conversing with each other along the way. St. Rita was beside herself with joy, awe, and wonder, and soon they were standing before the convent doors, which of course was locked since it was in the middle of the night. The saints easily opened the doors of the convent and showed her to enter, saying to her, "Rita, remain a rational bee in the garden of your spouse, Jesus. Love him with all your heart and soul, and your eternal salvation is secure. Return thanks to God for so great a favor done in your behalf. Praise his infinite mercy, and publish that nothing is impossible to God. Rita, the impossible is overcome in your behalf." They then disappeared, leaving Rita to herself inside the cloister. In the morning, the nuns were more than a little surprised to find a strange woman standing inside their cloister. Upon asking who she was and how she got inside, she answered, "I am that poor widow of Rocca, who many times asked to be admitted as a member of your community, and was as many times refused as unworthy of so great a happiness. But know, beloved superioress and sisters, that God, wishing to do me a singular favor, sent last night to my house in Rocca, his precursor, St. John the Baptist, accompanied by that Son of Heaven, St. Augustine, and that Star of Heaven, St. Nicholas of Tolentine, to conduct me into your midst. Nevertheless, I ask you, in the name of that God who has favored me with his mercy, to accept me as a member of your community." And then she told the entire story in great detail. The nuns listened in amazement and in one voice cried out that they would accept her as a companion, and humbly asked her forgiveness for turning her away so many times into their home. Rita was immensely happy in her new home. She soon took the habit and made her vows. One day she had a vision of a ladder stretching from the earth to heaven. Angels were ascending and descending by it. She heard a voice say, "Rita, if you wish to unite yourself to God in heaven, you must climb this ladder." Rita understood by this vision to be careful about not letting spiritual pride hamper her progress in spiritual perfection. And although she was already very much advanced in virtue, she became even more attentive to never making the mistake of relying on herself, but only on God. One of the steps to heaven is obedience, and the superioress of the convent, wanting to test Rita's obedience, asked her to water a dead plant every day. Obviously, bringing it back to life when it was already dead was impossible, but this was not the point of the request, but rather to test how humble and obedient Rita would be. So Rita watered the dead plant without word of complaint, and God, rewarding her obedience, made the plant come back to life, much to the amazement of the community. The plant didn't just come back to life, but flourished new leaves and buds and flowers, and was the most beautiful plant of all the plants in the convent. Poverty was another virtue Rita worked very hard on. It's said that she only owned one habit and lived the rest of her life in that habit. She was also buried in the same habit. When asked why she preferred to wear this thin, patched, and worn-out habit instead of wearing a new one, she said, "I wish to imitate my spouse in his holy poverty." She also made her cell as poor as she could. She slept on a hard bench with a stone as a pillow. The only decoration in her cell was her crucifix and a few holy cards of the life of Jesus. Never once was she ever heard to say, "This is mine," or "That's yours." She told her sisters, "If you want to advance in holiness, you need to give up all attachments of this world." In those days, it was common to practice severe penances such as scourging oneself, wearing hair shirts, and fasting, and Rita used them all. She scourged herself 3 times a day, once for the souls in purgatory, the second for the cloister, and the third for all souls in mortal sin. Many times the devil would appear to her to tempt her with vanity or sins against purity, and she would either throw herself in the snow or scourge her body to make her soul stronger. She ate only once a day, her only meal being bread and water. She would often spend most of the night in prayer and ecstasy. Soon, her holiness became so widely known that people from other cities began to seek her out in the convent, although Rita preferred to be left in solitude. Still, she took this as a sign from God that she was meant to serve them. Most sick people who came to her were cured by a single prayer, and very few left disappointed. One mother came running to the convent to beg Rita for her prayers when doctors told her that her daughter, who was very sick, would not get well. Rita said to her, "My good woman, have faith. Your child will not die. You will find her well again when you return home." As soon as the mother left, Rita hurried to the chapel to pray and beg God to spare the life of the child. Her prayer was answered immediately, and to the mother's great joy, when she came home, she found her child well. One day, while listening to a sermon about the sufferings of the crowning of thorns, Rita was so moved that she begged the Lord to allow her to suffer even just one thorn from his crown, so that she might better know and understand his pain. Jesus appeared to her, and with a bow and arrow struck her forehead with such force with a thorn that she would have fainted, had Jesus not supported her long enough to feel some of the pain that she had longed for. When she was able to speak again, she thanked God for such a singular grace. When the other sisters saw her the next day, they were very surprised to see the wound in her forehead, but they didn't know where it came from, nor did Rita tell them her secret. The wound became more painful by the day and became so ugly that it caused the other sisters to become sick just to look at her. Not wishing to burden the sisters with the ugliness of the wound, she spent most of her time in her cell in prayer. Soon, the wound became infected with little worms, which Rita called her little angels, and they would feed upon her flesh. The miraculous wound in her forehead was found out when Rita asked for permission to join the sisters to Rome for the Jubilee year. At first, she was told no, due to the wound in her forehead, but then the superior thought about it and said, "Sister, ask God if he will heal your wound. If he heals it in time for the pilgrimage, then you can go." So Rita immediately prayed for this request, and miraculously, the wound healed and her flesh closed up the same day that they were about to depart. Afterwards, upon arriving back at the convent, the wound instantly reappeared, convincing the other nuns that this wound was indeed from God. For the last 4 years of Rita's life, she suffered a sickness of real love sickness. This sickness started after Jesus allowed her to experience the same love and joy of seeing the beatific vision, which we normally can only see after death, as we would die of love and joy. But Jesus allowed her to be tormented in love without dying, along with suffering from the wound in her forehead. During these 4 years of her sickness, she was only able to survive off the body and blood of Jesus. One day, a cousin came to visit her. After a short visit, the cousin asked Rita if she wanted anything before she left. "Yes, cousin," Rita answered. "Please bring me a rose from my old home in Roccoparina." Her cousin didn't understand this unusual request since it was the middle of winter, and thought that maybe the sickness had gone to Rita's head. But to satisfy her, she did go to her home in Roccoparina, only to discover a beautiful red rose which had bloomed on a dead rose bush. She brought this rose back to Rita, who cried in thanksgiving to God. The rose was passed from sister to sister, who could not get over the beauty of the miraculous rose. Once again, God proved that nothing is impossible for him. Because of this miracle, to this day, roses are blessed in all Augustinian orders around the world on the feast of St. Rita and distributed to the faithful. It was revealed to St. Rita by the Blessed Mother that Rita would be taken to heaven within a few days. The sisters, having learned that Rita would be leaving them, tearfully gathered around her bed. She said to them, "Sisters, I'm not afraid to die. I already know what it is to die. It is to close the eyes to the world and to open them to God." After receiving the sacraments for the last time and bidding her sisters goodbye, Rita died, and one of the sisters saw her soul leave her body and fly to heaven assisted by angels. It was May 22nd, 1457. She was 76 years old. Immediately after her death, her cell was filled with a supernatural glow, and from her body came the smell of roses. This odor filled the entire convent, compensating the horrible smell that had come from the wound in her forehead. The little worms in the wound, Rita's little angels, turned into dazzling lights, and the wound shone from her head like a sparkling ruby gem. Her body and face, which had been emancipated from years of fasting, suddenly became years younger, and her face was more beautiful than it had been in life. Her body looked nothing like death, but only like it was sleeping peacefully. At the very same moment Rita died, bells in all holy places of Cascia began to ring by angels.